Welcome to episode 11 of the Beyond the Guitar podcast, where we help you play the music you love and we talk all things guitar and beyond. I'm Nathan Mills, joined by my co-host, Jeremiah Diaz, and today we have something special planned for you. Jeremiah is going to talk all things acoustics and how to make the best out of your room as you're recording for the guitar. That's something that starting out, I had no clue how to get a good sound in my recordings with the limitations of my own room. And that's something that Jeremiah over the years has kind of helped walk me through and given me lots of really actionable advice on, without me having to kind of break the bank and do anything super crazy, super expensive, buying tons of really expensive acoustic treatments or anything like that. So I'm going to give it over to Jeremiah to kick it off. And maybe Jeremiah, if you can preface a little bit by what your background is in this field for those who might not have kind of heard your background and your expertise on this.
So I got a bachelor's of science in digital audio technology. So I mentioned before, it included things like recording, acoustics, composition, you name it, anything relating to digital audio and recording. So acoustics was part of that. And today I just wanted to talk about recording, your classical or your acoustic guitar, steel string or nylon string at your home, and how that can maybe be an intimidating task if you're worried about your acoustics in your room, but I'm here to tell you that it's not going to be as hard as you might think. So before we start, I just wanted to mention that acoustics, all these things are principles; they're not rules. So there's going to be truth in everything that I'm saying, but you just want to take everything with a grain of salt, depending on what room you're in, right? So you can think of something like a cathedral, for example. Those were intentionally designed to amplify sound and to make things sound awesome, especially for someone speaking at the front of the room, or if a choir is singing, or an organ player is playing on an organ. But if you've ever heard like a rock band or a metal band or anything like that in a church cathedral, it sounds terrible. So every environment's going to have its own strengths and its flaws. So just keep that in mind. These aren't rules; these are principles that you want to apply as needed in your space. So don't overthink it. Audiences are forgiving as long as the music is good and as long as you're a good musician. You can think of things like the Beatles, for example. You listen to old albums from the Beatles, and the mixing and the audio is really crazy. But people still love their music. So that's just something to keep in mind.
That really applies too if you think about some original like classical guitar recordings, like we talked about in the last episode, Segovia and Julian Bream, and some of these older recordings that to this day sound really dated and the quality seems awful, and yet people still love them.
Yeah, and it kind of shows another reason why like lo-fi music is coming back, because people kind of like dirty recordings, and a lot of mainstream music is still very clean, quote unquote clean, as far as the audio goes. But again, if you have a smaller audience and people are kind of, you're trying to build an audience, if they enjoy your music and they respect what you're doing as a musician, they're not going to be as picky about the sound quality. So just that's something to keep in mind. So that being said, let's get into it. So there's three main things you want to worry about: reflections, resonances, and noise. Two of those things are acoustics related. So you have reflections and resonant frequencies. Those are the big things. And then we're not going to be talking about soundproofing, because soundproofing is a whole nother topic. Acoustics and soundproofing are totally unrelated as far as how to address them, right?
Right, and I think that's an important thing to really hit on, because I can't tell you how many times, like if you just try to YouTube how to soundproof a room or something like that, a huge misconception between what has to do with just improving the acoustics of the room, which is versus what's truly soundproofing it. And that I've seen so many people talk about, oh, you want to soundproof a room, you buy these little acoustic foam panels.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, that's from what I've learned from you over the years is, that's totally wrong. It's two separate things. That is more in the acoustics realm. And so there's definitely a misconception there that needs to be addressed.
Yes. Soundproofing and acoustic treatment are two completely different things. Soundproofing has everything to do with you wanting any outside noise that's outside of your space to not reach your microphone, to not reach your recording. So that has to do with what kind of insulation you're using. If you're using this thing called acoustic glue that you use in between sheetrock. If you're building double walls inside of your studio, if you have an isolation booth, all that stuff is soundproofing, and that doesn't really it doesn't come into play when you're considering acoustic treatment. Acoustic treatment is when you're trying to get your room to sound good for recordings. Now, what does that mean? When you're dealing with acoustics and recordings, you have a couple different types of sounds. So the first sound is direct sound, and that's sound that comes directly from your instrument to the microphone. All other sound is going to be reflected sound. So you want to minimize the amount of bad reflected sound that you're going to get coming to your microphone. And I know that can sound kind of weird, but the best way to kind of address this is to start by just clapping in your room. So what you can do is walk around your room and clap and listen for this tangy, metallic sounding reflection. It'll sound kind of like a flutter. And I want to try and give you an example right now. So let me see if this works. Yeah. So if you could hear that clap, there was a really metallic-y, fluttery sound, and it sounds horrible. So that's the type of stuff that you want to address. And there's a danger when you're doing acoustic treatment to really make your room sound dead. And that's not really what you're going for. You want your room to sound live, and that's like having the sound reflect in different directions. And this is what people call diffusion, and that's why you see these a lot. Diffusers are for sale online all over the place. But basically, these are acoustic panels that are used to diffuse sound, to spread the sound around the room, so that way you're not getting these intense reflections back into the microphone. Because what can happen is when you get strong reflections coming back into the mic, it can affect the direct sound, the pure sound that's coming from your instrument, and it can actually kind of damage, in a certain sense, your sound waves coming from your instrument, and that's what you want to try and minimize. And again, the third thing I talked about, noise. Again, because we're not dealing with soundproofing, I'm thinking more of things that's internal to your home or your bedroom. So again, this does cross over into soundproofing, but I'm not going to talk about how to soundproof. I'm just going to talk about how to work around the noise that might be coming into your mic. So anything from your computer, laptop, fan, or if you have a tower, the fan coming from your computer, noise outside like kids playing or cars driving by. You want to try to work around those. If you have, AC going, heater, washing machine, laundry, all those types of things you want to try and consider and work around. So yeah, any questions so far, Nathan?
Yeah, so from my understanding, based on what you were saying, it's kind of like you're finding this balance between a really echoey room, like with that nasty reflective noise, versus a completely dead room. So in my mind, I'm kind of thinking about, I think there's a time and a place for it, but like a vocal booth, if you think about those like tiny enclosed vocal booths, when you're in those, it's like you can almost it feels like you can hear your internal organs, and there's just no lively sound at all. And that's good for voiceover stuff and things like that, but I feel like you wouldn't want to play an instrument in that because it is just too dead. Or maybe, again, it might depend on the instrument, but that's where I can see where you want to, like if we're recording the guitar, acoustic guitar specifically, or classical guitar, you want a room that still has some life to it, but where you're saying you diffuse the sound with these different kinds of treatments that you can do that keep the sound reflecting around, but not directly back to the mic. Is that kind of how you were explaining it?
Yeah, and sound will eventually get back to the microphone some way, but it'll have less energy and it'll sound a little bit more airy, like more kind of like you have like some sort of a presence to the instrument, and it'll be less damaging to the sound wave coming from your instrument because it's all energy based, right? So if there's less energy in the sound wave, it's going to affect the pure sound coming from the instrument less. But yeah, you're exactly right as far as like what is the intention, what is the goal of your recording, right? So if you're just recording a solo instrument like guitar, you don't really want it to sound dead. So worst case scenario for people recording at home, if you're like in a really tough recording environment, there's just a lot of noise. Worst case scenario, what you do is you record in a closet. And this is where, we're talking about things are going to sound really dead in your closets. You have clothes, stuff like that. But what you'll want to do is just add a reverb afterwards. And, we're not going to focus too much on post-production stuff today, but yeah, because closets, all the air is going to get sucked out of there. What I mean by air is the high frequencies. High frequencies are going to just get eaten up by all your clothes. So it's going to feel very dead and very low endy. Bass frequencies are going to be more present in the recording. So reverb is going to help to kind of bring that life back. And if you have good reverb plugins, you can kind of work with not making it sound so dead. And the danger is with reverb, if you don't have good plugins, you can kind of have like metallic-y artificial sounds, but there are pretty good plugins out there that are cheap or even free. So anyway, like I said, we won't get in that too much. But worst case scenario, you're recording from home, you don't have a good setup or good isolation or anything like that, then closet's the way to go. But you just have to keep in mind that you're going to have to compensate for the lack of quote unquote air that you're going to have in your recording. But yeah, going back to, the instrument that you're recording, it's a great point because guitars are relatively quiet compared to most other instruments. So you think of like, trumpets or bagpipes or, pianos are giant, monsters to record. So you're as long as you're not dealing with electric guitar, classical and acoustic guitars are relatively quiet. So it's not going to be as difficult to mitigate reflections. And you're not going to have as many issues with resonances, which is what I mentioned before. Resonant frequencies happen when you have a wavelength that is so powerful and matches the either the length or the width of your room in a certain way to where your room acts as like an amplifier, and it starts to resonate in your bedroom. You can kind of think of it like a jump rope with two people at the ends of a jump rope, and they're swinging the jump rope around. That you can think of that as a wave, and that's kind of the principle of a sound wave. You think about people swinging the rope harder and harder and making it more powerful. That's kind of, you can just kind of think of that as what your room might be doing to, like, especially low frequencies, because low frequencies have really, really long wavelengths. But again, your guitar is not going to be super loud in that regard, and it doesn't have tremendous amount of low end. Like once you get below 100 hertz with guitars, it starts falling off pretty quick. So thankfully, guitars are relatively easy to record in bad acoustic environments. So that's a huge plus for guitarists.
One crazy like visual representation of resonant frequencies that I remember looking up when I was doing a project on this back in high school, actually. There was this bridge. I don't know if you've heard this story, Jeremiah. There's this suspended cable bridge across this like canyon, and the wind would howl through that canyon, and there was this one day where the pitch of the wind matched, hit that resonant frequency for those cables that were suspending the bridge, and the whole bridge started to basically have that kind of wavelength vibration, and was literally waving up and down, and and like broke, and it was like this whole catastrophic thing.
Yeah, it's crazy. So thankfully with guitar, you don't have to worry as much about standing frequencies and resonant frequencies, because you're not gonna. It's not a super powerful instrument in that regard, especially nylon string classical guitar. So with that being said, you'll want to consider the space that you're in. So, are you in a room? Are you in a living room? Are you confined to a kitchen or a garage? What kind of floor do you have? Do you have cement, rug, hardwood, tile, carpet? All those types of things. Do you have windows in your bedroom or in the room you're working in? You want to consider these things and then go from there. And like I mentioned, clapping, just walking around the room and clapping and listening where the reflections are the worst. That's where you kind of want to focus your attention. And what Nathan and I wanted to provide today is just solutions that are kind of DIY, where you may not even have to buy anything at all, because I think a lot of the stuff that you read online, and again, the online stuff is if you look up credible resources, all the stuff they're saying is true. But again, for acoustic guitar purposes, you don't really have to break the bank to have a good sounding recording. Nathan, you mentioned you didn't really do much of acoustic treatment at all in your previous setup.
Yeah, in my previous studio, basically. Well, really, every recording on my channel, every single video on my channel has been recorded in my studio or in a room that really, there's no things that I really went out of my way to do to make the acoustics better in that room. But I had a lot of things in that room that helped already, like carpet and, couches and panels on the wall that were just decorative, but they kind of served that purpose as well, and bookshelves and things like that I'm sure Jeremiah will get more into. But I didn't go out and buy any acoustic panels. I didn't try to soundproof in any way or sound treat really intentionally, so you can still get a good sound with what you have readily available. Yeah,
totally. And you mentioned diffusers. So if you look online for diffusers, it costs like anywhere from a couple $100s to $1,000 or more. And diffusers are very commonplace in your home. Bookshelves. If you look at an acoustic diffuser online, it looks a lot like a bookshelf. So bookshelves, if you have movie collections. I know those are becoming less popular, but if you have old movie collections on shelves or records or CDs, anything like that. Books are great because they're they're not hyper reflective, where something like a CD case might be hyper reflective, but books are awesome diffusers. If you have pictures on the wall, things like that, diffusers are all over the place in your home, so you can be creative with that aspect of it.
And again, to remind too, and to make sure I'm understanding this as well, diffusers again are the things that are basically preventing the sound from reflecting directly back to the microphone. They kind of help.
Yeah. And they're essentially dispersing the energy. So you want your room to sound live to a certain extent for classical guitar, because we're used to, as a solo instrument, we're used to hearing some sort of a room tone with classical guitar, right? If you're thinking about a pop song or something, that may not be ideal.
Yeah, but lots of and I mean lots of professional classical guitar recordings. Lots of times they avoid adding digital reverb, and they will intentionally go to these spaces like the bigger churches or places like that have that natural reverb built into it. But yeah, we're definitely not used to hearing it as a completely dry, dead sound.
Yeah, and that's where you can kind of get into a debate about, is it better to have a completely dry sound with classical if you don't have access to like a church and then add a reverb after, or is it better to have a little bit of room tone, have a little bit of liveness, and then add a reverb? You can kind of play around with that, but there's no, like I said before, there's no clear answer. It's more about the principles of acoustics and does it sound good? Ultimately, if you listen to it, compare it to other recordings, like does it sound good when you're done with it, with post reverb and all that stuff, and even just by itself, like does the recording sound good by itself? If you record in a closet, it's definitely not going to sound good by itself. So in your room or wherever you're recording, how does it sound by itself once you're done with the acoustic treatment aspect of it? So yeah, as we mentioned, diffusers, again, you can use all kinds of things for diffusion. People use egg cartons a lot. They'll like tack up egg cartons on their walls. So there's a lot of creative solutions you can do like that. And I mentioned before, consider your space, right? So let's say you're considering your floor, because a lot of reflections can come up from the floor into your mic. So if you're on cement, if you're in the garage or whatever, or if you're on tile or hardwood, you definitely want to consider a rug. Hardwood is great. It creates a great sound. Wood is just awesome for acoustics. But you definitely want some sort of a rug or something underneath you. So if you don't have a rug, you can use a towel, a beach towel or something. Get creative with it, just to kind of mitigate those immediate reflections coming from the floor, because that's gonna be a big part of it. If you're in cement or tile, those are going to be much harsher reflections, so you might have to get more creative. But again, at the very least, if you have some sort of a rug or something underneath you, that'll really help. And if you are in an area that is with more intense reflections like cement or tile, then I would recommend, if you do have some way to hang up some blankets around you, even if it's behind you or in front of you, just to kind of mitigate those really harsh reflections, because cement and tile floors that sound's gonna bounce all over the place, whereas hardwood is a little bit more absorbent and diffusive. And obviously, if you have carpet, then that's not going to be as big of a problem. Your concerns are going to be more with the walls around you. The only thing about carpet is, like I mentioned, it'll have less of a live sound. It'll sound a little bit more dead. But you got to work with what you got, right? Nathan, I know you have carpet in both your setups that you've had so far. You've had carpet, right?
Yeah, so far everything's been carpet. Although in the new studio that's being built, it won't have carpet. We're either looking at some type of hardwood or some type of laminate or whatever they call it. And in which case, yeah, I'm looking at big kind of like shag rugs that I can put down over it.
Yeah. If you can get hardwood, the bamboo hardwood is really nice. It's also cheaper than like regular hardwood, and it comes in all kinds of different tones and stuff. And it's more resistant than typical hardwood, and it's also environmentally friendly, because they can grow bamboo. Like bamboo is one of the fastest growing types of trees, I think. Oh yeah, we had bamboo. You remember we had bamboo at our house in Morocco. Yeah.
In the yard, and my dad hated it because it was just it would like spread like wildfire.
Yeah. So it's environmentally friendly. It's good. Anyway, yeah, bamboo flooring is great. But yeah. So I mean, you guys listen to Nathan's recordings. He's recorded on carpet, and it sounds great for what it is, right? So yeah. So let's see. Moving on from your floor, we'll get into walls. So walls are really tricky. Like I mentioned before, great diffusers are bookshelves, things with anything that has objects on them. Like I mentioned before, your pictures, anything like that you can hang up. And the whole goal, again, is to disperse the sound, so you're reducing the energy from a specific sound wave and you're breaking it up into smaller parts. And that's essentially what diffusers do. So instead of absorbing all of the sound, they're kind of partially absorbing some of it, and then the rest of it, they're just spreading it across the room to kind of give it a nice live sound. So walls are tricky. If you don't have access to other types of, just household diffusers, you can only, like maybe you only have diffusers on one wall, but the other wall is bare. Then, like I said, you can hang a blanket. You can hang, towels or something like that. Get creative with it, and then just as you're doing this, you can kind of clap and see, and then even just play your guitar. Like sit in the middle of the room, play a guitar, and just see how it sounds after you make the changes. It can. You'd be surprised what little changes like that will have, what type of impact it'll have on the recording.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Because I'm actually in this temporary setup. I am recording in a bedroom. And so I know a lot of people will probably be in that situation. And so for people who are in a bedroom, especially with like a twin bed, like not a huge bed, what if somebody was to just like flip up their mattress up against the wall instead of leaving it on the bed, would that kind of accomplish a similar thing?
Yeah. Again, it just depends on the limitations you have. If mattress is like the only thing you have at your disposal to reduce some really nasty reflections, then yeah, totally go for it. Windows are really, really bad, right? Because they just reflect like crazy. So, and also they let sound in, but that's a whole nother story. But to reduce window reflections, you can put up like pillows or something. And if you have thick curtains, you can close the curtains while you're recording. But yeah, a mattress would be great for a wall if you don't have any other option to reduce reflections, for sure.
Awesome.
Have you done that, Nathan? Have you taken your
Well, actually, in in this room that I'm in temporarily, it was just kind of I thought about it as I was doing it. I was like, well, maybe if I just, because we had to move a bed out of the room to be able to use the space, and I had just flipped the mattress up against the wall. I was like, oh, well, maybe that'll just, we'll call that acoustic treatment. I didn't even really know. A lot of the things I've done have been kind of happy accidents that you've told me as well after the fact that worked well. Like you had mentioned, my whole nerd shrine that I did in my old videos. For those of you who remember the early days of the channel, I had what I call the nerd shrine, which was that bookshelf that had all these like, figures and Legos and books and movies and little plush toys. And then I had the big canvas wall art up top that was kind of the centerpiece that I would change based on what video I was doing. But again, it was canvas material. All of that I was just doing for the visual aesthetic of the video, turns out was all kind of contributing to the overall diffusion of the room and helping improve the acoustics of the room, which again, it was just a totally happy accident.
Yeah, totally. And that's kind of what I was trying to get at earlier. So if I didn't make it clear enough, decorations are great. Decorate your room or whatever environment you're in. If you're like worried, like, oh, it's going to mess with my acoustics, don't worry about it. Just go ahead and decorate, because more often than not, your room is going to be not acoustically pleasant. So the more decorations, the better, for sure.
Right. And I mean, you think about it practically too. Like when you move into a new house, the house is super weird, echoey, right? It's because it's empty and it's just got this billowy, echoey sound. And then just naturally, as you move in and put all your stuff in there and your furniture and everything, it's not like you're doing anything to treat it acoustically, but that echo is drastically reduced. Again, depending on what you do, it still might not be, optimized to record, but you can hear that difference that is made just by those things, like, again, furniture and stuff like that. So the more you can add to that, plus if you're making videos as well, it all just works together because you're adding decor and a visual aesthetic to the video.
Exactly. Yeah, double-edged sword. Yeah, it adds pleasant visuals for people to.
And I do, I
point out like Nathan's old Pikachu that he used to get crap for.
Yeah, that was a great diffuser. The Pikachu would just absorb and diffuse all of the sound. I had to get rid of I replaced Pikachu. Got replaced with the 100,000 YouTube plaque.
I remember that.
So, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do run the temptation of focusing more on the visual aesthetic of my videos. Like as I'm planning out this new studio, Jeremiah and I were just talking about this before the call or before the podcast. I'm planning out my studio and the decor and how I want the layout, and I'm always thinking kind of the visual aesthetic. I want the videos to look really cool, and I was even thinking about, because Jeremiah's told me about these specific types of diffusers that you can make yourself or buy, that are these kind of wood pegs, and it's kind of hard to describe. And I don't know if Jeremiah was going to talk about this or not, but there's this company that I found that's Rebel Sky Acoustics that make these like custom made ones with a frame, and they're all kinds of cool different colors. And I was looking at this, I was like, oh, this would look awesome, like in the background. And I wasn't thinking about where I should place it or anything. I'm just thinking about where it would look cool. And so, yeah, I think there's a balance probably, that, because Jeremiah touched on this, right? Like, it would be best to, for example, Jeremiah, if I was to get one of those things and hang it on the wall, correct me if I'm wrong, but I should put it, if I'm facing the microphone with my guitar, I should put it on the wall behind me, not in front of me where I'm facing, because that's the part that the microphone is actually facing that back wall behind me, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it kind of depends again for each scenario, right? Like I said, these are all principles; they're not rules to follow. So if you're closer to the front wall, but you have a bunch of stuff in front of you, like your desk, your monitors, your sound monitors, and your screens, so that can all act as diffusion. And if you're, just a few feet behind you is your wall, or however many feet it is, then yeah, you'll want to consider the reflections behind you. So yeah, I suggested putting it behind you just because more often than not, the sound reflecting from behind you is going to come back at the mic. But like I said, you'll want to just kind of test each room. Like I said, they're not rules, right? You want to take everything with a grain of salt and just test everything as you go. But you mentioned the acoustic panels and whether I was going to talk about that. I wasn't going to, but it's a good point. Nathan and I were looking at some acoustic panels today, and the biggest ones they have are like $1,100. So I was thinking like, oh man, these are easy to make. You don't have to buy them. They're like, some pieces of 2x4, some like post pieces of wood, and you just chop them up and then you glue them together, and it's not a big deal. So they'll have things on the website that say like, they're handcrafted, and they use these algorithms to like, expertly diffuse sound and all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, I'm sure that they do have some sort of algorithm they're using, but like at the end of the day, that's not going to be a deal breaker. So you could make a diffuser yourself for like, $100 if you just buy the wood. Right. But not everybody has time to do that. So
right. Well, yeah, that's what we were joking about, is that like it would probably take me 40 hours of work to try to, because I'm the farthest thing from handy that there really is. But
plus, you don't want to chop off any of those precious fingers that you got. Yeah,
that's what we were talking about too. Jeremiah was like, "Well, your dad probably has like one of those like circular saws." I was like, "Look, I'm trying to stay as far away from any type of no matter what shape the saw blade comes in. I'm not trying to get close to it, because I would be the one to. I actually did back in college. I worked with my father-in-law. And part of my job, I was working in a warehouse, and part of the job was sawing up with a circular saw, these thick cardboard boxes for shipping. And it was one of those things where the cardboard box would always catch on the teeth of the saw and like get ripped in toward the saw.
Oh my gosh. That's terrifying.
It was like, I asked my father-in-law, like, cause I would always just hold my hand as far away from the blade as possible, knowing that was going to happen. And then that would make it even more likely to get caught and ripped in, cause it wasn't really tight. So I asked my father-in-law how to do it, and he's like, oh, you just got to really choke up on it and hold it real close. And then it kind of like still pulled in and like nearly got his hand. So I was like, oh. I remember telling my guitar professor what work I was doing over the summer, and he just looked at me like in horror. I was like working around all this heavy machinery. But anyway, man. Yeah, I think it probably goes back to the kind of that 80-20 principle that we were talking about in the productivity episode, where I always kind of have to think about how to phrase it. 20% of the work yields 80% of the results. So it's like, if I by myself make one of these, DIY solutions, that's going to get me pretty much 80% of the way there. Whereas I could spend $1,000 on their fancy algorithm that might help me with that extra little 20%. But then is it really worth it?
Right, exactly. And you just got to weigh, you got to weigh the pros and cons and the costs and all that. Like I mentioned before, I was thinking of just stuff that you wouldn't even have to buy. Like you don't even have to go out and buy wood to make this stuff. But if you have that money and you can do it, I would totally recommend making your own acoustic panels, because it's way cheaper than going out and buying them. So moving on from diffusion, if you don't have any other questions about that, Nathan.
No, that's good.
So resonances is next, right? So resonances are a huge problem with studios and recording environments. But like I mentioned before, you're in luck, because if you're a guitarist, it's not as big of a deal as most other instruments. What you mainly want to avoid doing is do not record in a corner. So do not record in the corner of a room. The reason is that bass frequencies love corners. They just build up, that because as you get closer and closer to the corner, the ability for a standing wave to form is higher, because the walls are getting closer together as the corner, as you get to the to the tip of the corner, or whatever you want to call it. Bass frequencies just love those corners. So stay out of the corner of your room, any corner of your room. Just, you want to be in the middle of the room, typically, or in whatever spot you've designated is acoustically the best, because of the way that you've arranged your panels and everything, or your bookshelf, or whatever it is that you got going on. Just avoid corners at all costs, because it's going to just cause a lot of woofiness and bassiness in your recording. If that's all you got to work with, then just keep that in mind. If you're like, man, I don't understand why my guitar sounds so bassy, or whatever the case might be, just make sure you keep that in mind in post, and you'll want to EQ that bass down a little bit, just to kind of get rid of the woofiness in your recording.
And so does that matter? Is that kind of a universal thing no matter which way you're facing? So like if I'm facing the corner and the mic is facing me, or if I'm facing away, like either way, you don't want to be in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, same deal. If you're like a few feet from the corner, but you're facing the corner instead of like with your back to the corner, either way, it's going to cause problems. It's going to cause more problems if you are with your back to the corner, because then the bass frequencies are going to be just coming right back at the microphone diaphragm. But same is true if you flip around, you're probably going to have a lot of bass frequency there. And then also just the reflections coming back from those two walls is going to be really bad. So just in general, you just want to avoid corners in your studio.
Yeah, I mean, this is really good for me to hear, even because in my old setup, I really was kind of in a corner. I mean, I had my desk in between me and the corner, but I imagine that still wasn't really ideal. And I think there have been times too where you've kind of mentioned to me that in certain recordings I have been a little bass heavy, and I've had to kind of try to EQ some of that out. And generally I EQ some of the low end out in post anyway. But I think an easy solution would be that, I could back up away, and there's no reason that I had to be, that close to my computer, for example, and that close up in that corner.
Yeah, and like I mentioned before, if you got to work with what you got. If you have limited space, and you don't really have any choice but to be kind of close to a corner, then that's what you got to do. But in your case, Nathan, I know you had a much larger room, so yeah, definitely, if that was a possibility, I would have recommended, backing up from the corner. But again, like we've mentioned before, Nathan's recordings sound great. So again, all of this is mostly to encourage you guys. Like it might sound like a wave of information, a lot of information, but it's mostly to encourage you that even if you have a rough recording space, you can still come out with recordings that sound great, even if you're not breaking the bank. You're just using stuff that you have at home. And that's kind of what the goal of this conversation is meant to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, I mean, because again, I literally spent zero money intentionally on acoustic treatment so far. It was all just, again, accidents related to decor and things like that. So, I hope that can encourage you listening to my recordings, knowing that I didn't really go well out of my way, but still having these really practical, actionable things that in many cases are fairly simple, like things like just get out of the corner if you can, or, try to lay down a rug if you can, or things like that are still manageable, that set you up better for success so you don't have to try to work around as many things. One interesting thing too about resonance, because when I record, I sit right near my guitars that are hanging on the wall. And you can have that sympathetic resonance between guitars, and so I could actually hear when I strum my guitar or play some notes, you hear the guitars on the wall start to kind of hum and make some vibrations because their strings start to resonate. And so, I mean, that's kind of a small thing, but it is, if you do have multiple guitars, the chance of that really coming into the mix, depending on how close they are, is pretty slim. But that is something to consider, like what other instruments are around.
Yeah, for sure.
We definitely had that. Like if you're in the room with a drum, for example, you can even start rattling just rattling the snares just by playing the guitar.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to mention it now that you've mentioned it, because initially I wasn't thinking about talking about other instruments in the room, but that's a great point. Especially drums. Throw a blanket over those freaking drums and like turn the snare off. They're terrible for recording. So yeah, that's an awesome point, Nathan. I hadn't thought of talking about that one, but
thank you. You're welcome.
Yeah. That comes from your years of experience of professional recording, and
it comes from my years of like faking my way through and figuring things out as I go, and then asking you for the advice when I'm failing miserably.
Yeah, well, yeah, you've done pretty well for yourself, Nathan. I'm proud of you. So. Let's just kind of wrap up on resonances. Like I said before, I wasn't really focusing on having people go out and buy stuff, but if you are really wanting to reduce the woofiness of your corner, because that's what you got, you're kind of in a tough spot space wise. You can buy bass traps online, and they're basically either wood kind of panels that are enclosed that have these acoustic absorbers inside of them, or there's just straight up foam, like these foam corners things that you put up in the corner of your wall. You can either tack them up or glue them up. But those are kind of your options. Again, if you're recording guitar, most times you can probably just get away with not having them because those instruments are so quiet. When you're dealing with things like, recording electric guitar or electric bass or anything like that, where the bass frequencies are just going to be really, really loud, that's when you want to worry more about your corners and trying to have bass traps and mitigate resonances that way. But like I said, for acoustic and classical guitar, don't worry about it too much. Don't stress about it. As you just heard, Nathan was recording in the corner on accident this whole time, and it wasn't a big deal.
Right. Dang it.
So last thing I wanted to touch on is noise, right? And again, we're not really dealing with soundproofing. This is just how to work around the noise in your environment. So the first thing, and probably most prevalent, will be your computer. Professional studios have these nice, super fancy like cases or like enclosures where they put the computer inside and they like close it and it's like cooled. It's got like air conditioning. It's insane. But most people don't have those, right? So what you'll want to do is just be as far away from your computer as possible, and point the microphone away from the computer. So the diaphragm is away from the computer. You don't want the noise from the computer coming through your recording. I say don't, but again, depends on what you're doing. If you're doing lo-fi or that type of genre, anything within that realm. Again, people are really forgiving, and in some cases, it's actually desired. Again, with lo-fi, people want noise in their recording, right? But if you're going more traditional classical guitar, then yeah, definitely get as far away from your computer as possible. If you have a long XLR cable for whatever for your mic, that's awesome. Otherwise, just make sure you have the diaphragm of the microphone pointed away from the computer, so you don't get that annoying fan noise coming through. And then there's other things like I mentioned before. Anything from your heater, your air conditioning, a refrigerator, laundry, kids in the house, neighbors, cars going by, anything like that you'll want to try and avoid. So if it's a hot summer day and you don't want to turn the AC off, record at night. If it's a cold winter day and you don't want to turn the heater off, maybe record during the day for practice like hell, and then record during the day, so where you can maybe turn the heater off for a certain amount of time. And the same goes, for laundry. Just plan around laundry. If you got to do laundry or whatever, if you have kids, wait till your kids go to sleep. There's all these things that you can do to work around, and I know that's pretty much what Nathan did for his recordings. He kind of had a plan around when there was the least amount of noise going on. I can let you talk about that more, Nathan.
Yeah. For years, I mean, ever since the beginning of my channel, that's been something that I've had to work around. I've pretty much always recorded either at night when the kids are sleeping or when they're out of the house. And then, if the neighbors are doing yard work or something like that, got to wait till that's done. Turning off the heat and turning off the AC. Yeah, I've dealt with that. Because there's lots of times there's some white noise that we are just used to kind of tuning out.
Right.
And then you hear it, the mic picks these things up and you're like, oh, that's a little bit more, because like Jeremiah said, especially in a classical guitar, a solo guitar recording, those things really do stand out, and you don't want any of that added noise. And so, I would always kind of feel like I was a little bit up against the clock in the dead heat of summer or the coldest times during winter. I was always like, all right, I got maybe this hour window before my kids upstairs start to really freeze or start to boil. Because you got to turn that stuff off. And then working around it. Yeah, it might seem like it's kind of obvious, but like I said, some of these white noise things we don't necessarily think about. So recording at night generally is going to be your friend. And I don't know, again, if Jeremiah was going to talk about this some, and this would be a topic for another episode, but there are also, it is crazy, like the plugins and things that are coming out these days, because I didn't until just recently pick up a plugin that really specializes in listening to and basically cutting out certain frequencies. So if you do have the hum of a refrigerator or the hum of a AC, going on, it can do a pretty good job of cutting that out. But again, that's a topic for another day, and that's something that I didn't do for years. And I still, honestly, I still turn off the air and stuff like that, even though I do have that plug-in now, because, it's not 100% effective. And if the air cuts on and off, then it's a whole other thing.
Yeah, actually, that's a great point, Nathan. I was actually going to talk about noise canceling plugins. So plugins are great, but as you've probably heard, the old saying, "Oh, we'll fix it in post." It's always better to capture what you want on the actual recording than it is to try and fix it later, because ultimately you're damaging the audio. So especially with noise canceling software, it is really amazing. I mean, I have noise canceling software that's made by Isotope, and it's fantastic. But that being said, especially with something as intimate as classical guitar, if you do have like a really loud fan or something going on in the background, once you use the noise canceling software, it's designed to remove the noise without affecting the audio, but it's, at least right now, it's not possible. So it might sound great still. And again, all these things I'm saying, they're principles, they're not rules. So apply them as you see fit or as you see is necessary. But I would just recommend that if you can get away with not having noise while your recording is going, that's the best way to do it.
Right. Yeah. And I do personally use the noise canceling plugin still on my recordings. But I don't feel like it's having to do as much, so it's not going to affect as much of the overall sound, because I do have all those other things turned off. So it's really just like that last little bit of just white noise just from just the room itself. Kind of, I feel like those higher frequencies that kind of just hiss.
Yeah.
It knocks those out. And I feel like to my ear, it doesn't damage, it doesn't really make a huge difference on what I'm hearing in the guitar itself. But yeah, I can imagine if it's trying to cut out something more significant, I don't know, with a lot of shared frequencies or something like that, it could be really problematic.
Exactly. Yeah. And pro tip as well. Again, we weren't really going to get into the post stuff, but now that Nathan's bringing it up, so if you have a lot of like kind of white hissy noise in your guitar recording, you don't necessarily have to use your noise canceling software. You can EQ it out, because with guitar, especially classical, steel string, there's way more high frequencies, but especially classical, the high frequencies dip off really fast once you start getting to the thousands hertz. So you can actually use EQ to kind of bring those high frequencies down, and it's gonna be more natural sounding than using the noise reduction software. But
gotcha. So
you're a noob, so don't worry about it,
Nathan. Jeremiah was really excited about this episode where he could really expose my ignorance.
Sorry,
I'm going to use a fancy.
You're going to ask me a question.
So, are you talking about? Is that like specifically like the low pass, high pass filters?
It'd be a low pass filter.
Low pass filter.
Yeah, so it could be a low pass filter that has a really smooth curve. It could be a high shelf where you lower the high shelf frequencies. Yeah, I mean, honestly, it just kind of depends. Like I said before, just take everything with a grain of salt. I mean, if it works for you, it works for you. And, obviously you, Nathan, are getting great results. So it just depends on how it sounds at the end. If you can listen to it and be like, wow, that actually sounds really good. I can't tell that, I recorded in a corner, or I can't tell that I used, noise canceling software or whatever. Whatever the end result is, that's kind of the goal. And again, listeners are very forgiving if the quality of the music and the musicality of it is good, the musicianship aspect, so don't stress too much about it. Again, this is a conversation that was meant to be helpful to you guys and encouraging. But that's most of what I had today, Nathan. Any questions for me or?
No, I think you hit on everything that I was thinking about. Let me just, to kind of recap all of the really actionable things that people can do and make sure that I understand kind of your main points here. So number one, I guess I would say one of the takeaways is that you can do a lot with a little.
Yeah.
And you can, if we're talking about, if you've got the worst case scenario where you just have no options, your room is just super echoey and reflective, you can record in a closet, add reverb afterwards.
A closet with clothes. An empty closet. An empty closet is terrible. Yeah.
We'll assume that everybody here has clothes.
Yeah.
And then we're talking about diffusers to help disperse sound around the room and keep it from just reflecting immediately back to the microphone. You can just use things like bookshelves, blankets, even egg cartons for the floor to prevent the sound from reflecting directly back up. You mentioned that hardwood is great. If you have hardwood, you just want to put rugs over it, like a rug, and record over the rug, or at the very least a towel. Or if you have carpet, which is what I've always had, that works very well for kind of absorbing and diffusing the sound, but it's just not as lively as hardwood.
Yeah.
And then talking about resonances don't record in the corner was a big takeaway because of the bass frequencies, and also just be aware of any other instruments that you might have in the room that your own instrument could be potentially activating and causing them to create noise. Those were kind of some of my big takeaways. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. Yep. That's you got it, Nathan. You passed. And passed the test with A+.
Yes. And then to kind of summarize as well, again, we mentioned a lot of it, but what I do personally is, again, just a combination of most of these things. I haven't paid any money on any type of acoustic treatment. I've just had, again, bookshelves, wall art, canvases hung up on the wall, carpet on the floor, couch, desk, just all the usual stuff. And then, so my room was fairly dead. It's more noticeable in my voice in like instructional videos. I feel like you can hear a little bit more of that reflection in my voice. But with the guitar, I felt like it sounded pretty dead. And so then, again, I add a pretty good amount of reverb in post. So I definitely don't rely on the liveliness of the room sound to give me that reverb. Any reverb you hear in my recordings is definitely all digital. And it is actually with a stock plugin as well. I didn't pay for that, although it could certainly be better. But so that's what I do. And again, the encouragement that we hope for you is that, again, you can do a lot with a little, but just being aware of these things. And we also talked about the noise thing, which is a lot of that's fairly straightforward, like recording at night, if possible, when there's minimal noise, not letting the laundry go or the air or the heat, or whatever the case may be, trying to distance yourself from the computer if it's making a lot of noise. The encouragement here is that, I for a lot of this just kind of learned as I went. Even today, I learned that I probably shouldn't be recording in a corner. So you do the best with what you have, but if you can be informed on some of these things, you can make some better decisions that will improve your recordings with minimal effort. Yeah,
absolutely. Yep. And like I said, don't sweat it. Just do what sounds good. That's how it goes at the end of the day. Just do what sounds good.
Yeah. I think this is one of those things that people can really obsess over. Jeremiah has, with this whole, because I am doing soundproofing now. That was one of the reasons we moved, was that I got kind of tired of having to always record at night or when the kids are sleeping. And because this is what I do for a living, it'd be one thing if it was a hobby and just doing on the odd occasion. But so we are looking into soundproofing and all that. And just like with acoustic treatment, it can be a rabbit hole. Like you can go as deep as you want, but ultimately you can get a really good sound with relatively smaller effort. But same kind of thing. Jeremiah was kind of encouraging me throughout all this, because I was like, oh my goodness, I need to do this, and this, and this, and I need to get that, and I need to spend, tens of thousands of dollars. And, again, he's always kind of reminded me that you can really, a little bit goes a long way. You just need to be intentional about certain things. And so,
and I was kind of like, whoa, Nathan, I mean, you're getting great sound with what you have, and you didn't spend a lick of money on soundproofing. So just, the end result for you in this case, like you mentioned, you do have a budget to do this, but you mostly you're concerned with like, okay, I want to be able to record during the day when the kids are up and playing and stuff. And it's like, okay, so how do you achieve that, right? You're not going for like, platinum record selling recording studios that, you know what I mean, they're like have these $100,000 studios. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. It's a whole different can of beans.
Yeah, exactly. It's a whole nother wheel of cheese.
Yeah. You keep saying that, and I still don't think that's a thing. Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for that, Jeremiah. We really appreciate you sharing some expertise. Let us know if you're listening to this on YouTube. Leave us a comment if this was helpful and you would like to hear more of this kind of recording side of things. There's so many things that we can talk about related to that. You can also reach out to us on Instagram. I'm at Beyond the Guitar. Jeremiah is at Chomachi. Of course, you can also find, if you want to hear my music videos of my arrangements, I'm Beyond the Guitar on YouTube and everywhere, really. If you want to learn how to make your own classical or fingerstyle guitar arrangements, you can take my free training, Fretboard Freedom, on my website, beyondtheguitar.com, where I teach you how to find and play chords anywhere on the fretboard. It's just a great way to get started. I use those concepts in every single arrangement that I make. And again, it's totally free, beyondtheguitar.com. Jeremiah, where can people find you?
You can look up Chomachi. That's Chomachi. I got a few tracks out. I'm finally wrapping up one that I've been putting off for like a year or so. It's a collaboration between myself and my brother. He plays acoustic guitar. It's going to be like a little lo-fi chill beat. So that I'm planning on doing the whole like submission to Spotify thing. So I don't know how long that's going to take, but hopefully in the next like maybe 3 or 4 weeks that'll be out. I have a deadline for myself that I'm going to finish it. I'm going to finish mixing and mastering this weekend. So
yeah.
But yeah, other than that, I play drums for a band called Junko, Junco. You can look us up. But that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for listening. And as always, much love, and we'll see you in the next one.